Title: The Cabin in the Silence. 07. Silence. That was what I was chasing when I left everything behind. The world had grown too loud, horns blaring, voices overlapping, the constant hum of city life digging into my skull like a dull knife. I needed quiet, true quiet, the kind you could only find where civilization ceased to exist. That's how I found the cabin. Nestled deep in the Pacific Northwest, far from the suffocating clatter of human life, it was everything I had dreamed of. Thick wooden beams, a sturdy stone fireplace, the scent of pine and old books filling the air. No traffic, no cell service, just me, the trees, and the wind. I thought I had found peace. But peace in places like this is an illusion fragile, waiting to be shattered. The silence, once comforting, now felt like something lurking just out of sight, holding its breath, waiting. But peace in places like this is an illusion fragile, waiting to be shattered. I was wrong. 043. My first few days were bliss. I woke to birdsong instead of sirens, fell asleep to the whisper of the wind instead of my neighbor's arguments. The nearest house was a 10-minute walk down a winding dirt path, a fact I found reassuring at first. I didn't need people. That was the whole point. Then, on my 6th day, someone knocked at my door. The sound cut through the silence like a gunshot, reverberating through the empty cabin. I hadn't seen a soul in days. My breath hitched as I hesitated, every nerve in my body screaming that something was off. The sound cut through the silence like a gunshot, reverberating through the empty cabin. I hadn't seen a soul in days. My breath hitched. 119. The sound startled me. It was a firm, deliberate knock, 3 sharp raps against the heavy wood. I hadn't seen another soul since arriving, hadn't expected to. Cautiously, I made my way to the door and peered through the small window. An old woman stood outside, cradling a basket in her hands. She was dressed in an old-fashioned sweater, her long gray hair hanging loose over her shoulders. Her face was deeply lined, her piercing blue eyes holding something unreadable. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just stood there, waiting. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. 151. "Welcome to the woods," she said, extending the basket toward me. "You'll need this." I hesitated before taking it. Inside were glass jars filled with preserved strawberry, blackberry, something dark I couldn't identify. "Thank you," I said, unsure of what else to offer. She nodded once. Then, in the same even tone, she said, "Always keep your lanterns full, your windows shut tight, and your wits sharper than your axe." Then she turned and walked away. 225. I watched her disappear down the path, the trees swallowing her whole. Her words sat uneasily in my stomach, a warning wrapped in politeness. But there was something in her voice, a sharpness, a knowing edge that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. It felt less like advice and more like a command. The way she spoke, like she knew something I didn't, left a chill that refused to fade. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just a rural neighbor's way of offering advice. That night, a storm rolled in. The wind howled through the trees, rain hammering against the roof like impatient fingers. I lit a few candles, curled up with a book, let the isolation lull me into a false sense of security. Then the knocking started. 259. It was louder this time, more urgent, a fist slamming against wood, over and over. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat as I stared at the door. Through the small window, I could make out a shape, a tall, broad, drenched from the storm. Not the old woman. A man. 333. My pulse thundered in my ears. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocking continued, harder now, rattling the frame. Whoever he was, he wasn't leaving. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. But the silence that followed wasn't normal. It was heavy, pressing in, as if something or someone was still there, just beyond the door, waiting. And then, a faint sound, a slow, deliberate scraping against the wood. But I swear, I still heard something, a faint scraping sound, like nails dragging across wood, just outside the door. Silence. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally worked up the courage to peek through the window, there was nothing there. just darkness and rain. 4:03. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the cabin sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. The old woman's warning echoed in my head. Your windows shut tight. Your wits sharper than your axe. The next morning, I found footprints in the mud outside my door. They were deep, erratic, as if the person had been pacing, watching. I locked my doors, kept my axe closer. 4:38. Days passed without incident. I convinced myself it had been a lost hiker, someone seeking shelter from the storm. But the sense of unease never left. Then, one night, I saw her, through my window, at the edge of the woods. The old woman. She stood motionless, facing away from my cabin. Her hair, long and tangled, hung in dripping strands. She wasn't moving. But something about her posture was wrong. Her head tilted too far to one side, like a broken marionette. Her fingers twitched slightly, an unnatural, jerky motion that sent a spike of fear straight through me. And then, even worse, I realized her lips were moving, but no sound came out. But something about her posture was wrong. Her head tilted too far to one side, like a broken marionette. Her fingers twitched slightly, just barely perceptible in the dim light. She wasn't leaving. 5:11. My stomach twisted. My first instinct was to call out, but something stopped me. A primal, gut-deep fear that whispered, "Don't let her know you see her." I shut the curtains, locked the door. Saturday in the dark, listening to the silence press against the walls. Then the knocking started again. But this time, it came from two places at once, one at the door, the other against the window. My stomach dropped as I realized that whatever was out there, there was more than one of them. But this time, it came from two places at once, one at the door, the other against the window. My stomach dropped. 5:46. This time, I didn't check. I didn't move. I sat, heart hammering, staring at the flickering candlelight until the knocking faded into nothingness. The next morning, I packed my bags. I left the preserves untouched on the counter. I didn't look back.